Okay, I think we'll get started and I'll open things up with an introduction, a little bit of background, and we'll go ahead and get started with this meeting. As folks come in, we can just kind of keep rolling. There will be time at the end for Q&A, so if anybody's arriving late, we'll bring folks up to speed as we go. Uh, I'm Alex Nordquist. I'm your Forestry Division Manager here at the City of Bozeman. We're under the Parks and Rec Department, and we're here tonight to talk about this plan that's kind of our big picture, long-term planning for the next 10 years. Urban forest management is kind of the whole big picture for not just what we do internally as a forestry division. It's also how we interact with our community, and the overall urban forest that's outside of areas we manage. So kind of a brief snapshot of what we do. It's myself and 4 full-time employees and some summer help. We handle planting, pruning, removals, and any emergency work for your city street trees between a sidewalk and street curb. That's called the street boulevard, and those are the majority of the trees we work on, and also all of our city and park space trees. Um, Outside of that, we're talking about the urban forest. We're talking about trees in our backyards, in our public spaces that the city doesn't manage, and how those all tie together to form our urban canopy. And we have a consultant team here that's been helping us through this process. We want to hear from the community as we develop this plan, and we're quite a ways into the planning process now and have some substance to discuss, right? So some of this is going to be technical kind of jargon and terminology for me and my staff to talk about, but other items are really more to engage the community and learn about the benefits of trees, hear from you about what's important, what's missing, and how we can come together as a group and really put this plan together. Um, there will be time at the end of the presentation for Q&A as we're going through this. If you want to drop a question in the chat, I'll sort of collect all of those. We're not going to unmute during the presentation, but towards the end, and we do have that Q&A time saved. If we have that availability to use the raise your hand function and maybe pick some Q&A from that, we can unmute folks and also have that option in addition to the chat. So aside from myself, really just kind of hosting this and helping develop this process, we have our consultant team here to present, and that's local firm DG&A with Planet Geo as well as a sub. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves and start the presentation.
All right, thanks, Alex. And I recognize some names in attendance here, and wanted to thank you all for all of your participation so far, and what we, assume is going to be helping us see this through and make sure we have all the local input we can. And before we kind of do introductions here, I just wanted to give kind of my high-level take on what this meeting is and how it fits into the overall process. So. We've been working on putting together the draft Urban Forest Management Plan, or UFMP, for a while now, and we plan to make that publicly available next Monday, and that will be available for 30 days for public review and comment. And so the purpose of this meeting is now that that's nearly done, is to just explain what is in there, and it's a lengthy document, so we want to help everybody understand kind of how to navigate it so it's not too overwhelming, and then answer any questions you might have at this point in time, mainly about process, but if you have substantive questions, we can take those as well. But we do plan to have a follow-up meeting halfway through this review and comment period, where we can get into a whole lot more of the substance of what you're seeing in the plan, what you'd like to see in there that maybe you're not seeing, and that sort of thing. So that next meeting is going to be meatier than this one. And I also want to acknowledge that I know some of you have been following this process really closely. We had originally planned to have that draft available for public review today, coinciding with this meeting. And it took us a little longer to incorporate the public feedback and the Urban Parks and Forestry Board feedback and commission feedback that we got on the preliminary draft. And so we're still working on that, but we will have that available next Monday. It'll be the same length comment period, just pushed back a week. Okay, so Alex introduced himself. Mitch is on the call as well, the Parks and Rec Department manager. And I don't think Mila's here today with us. I thought she might be. And anyway, Mila and I work together at DJ&A. I've been managing this project on our side of things and kind of coordinating the consultant team with the city and everyone else involved. And maybe before I go on, Mitch, I saw you came back on video. Did you want to introduce yourself or say anything at this point?
Well, sure. I'll just make it quick. My name is Mitch Overton. I'm the director of the Bozeman Parks and Recreation Department. Forestry is one of the divisions within the department, with 5 divisions in the Parks and Rec Department. You may have seen on the title slide, this is the 2026 update. We're updating this plan from the 2016 plan. And I'd say that it is fairly significantly different community all in than we were in 2016, and certainly which we're very pleased about. We've got much greater interest in trees and in this plan than we had back then. That was a very good plan. We've executed a lot of our marching orders from those. We've hit all of the high level accomplishment goals that were set for us there. But it's really time to take this to the next level. And as our team hears me say often, trees are really having a moment right now, and I don't think that moment is going to change. So it's a great time for trees, and we appreciate everybody's participation. Thank you, Josh.
Thanks. And I guess Matt, since you're on, why don't you go ahead and give yourself a quick introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Hey everyone, I'm Matt Urmson, Urban Forestry Planner with Planet Geo, ISA certified arborist with specializations in water efficient landscaping, tree risk management, tree pest and disease management, and wildfire mitigation. And we have been doing a lot of the technical analyses and recommendations for the UFMP. And I'll pass it over to my teammate, Chris.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Chris Pfeiffer. I'm the Director of Urban Forestry Strategy. I've been with Planet Geo since 2014, helped to establish this section for developing plans for managing trees in communities. And this one is really special and unique because of the momentum and all of the voices and the planning efforts going into this. And so my role has been involved in weighing in on approaches to strategies and challenges, and looking at some deep dives into canopy goal setting and some program outlooks. And here to help with the conversation or address questions, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. And just so everyone knows what to expect here, for the next half an hour or so, we're going to kind of fairly quickly go over the project schedule and where we are and where we're going. And then the heart of this is going to be to talk about the draft UFMP content. And that's organized in accordance with these four basic questions here, right? The first one, what do we have, right? That's a snapshot in time that's kind of focused on the tree inventory, the canopy coverage, the current management practices, and available resources. And then what do we want? Future vision, like what are the goals and strategies and actions to achieve those goals? And those we've, worked very closely with city staff and gotten a lot of public feedback so far that we've incorporated, as well as the board and the commission have been involved with that as well. Next question, how do we get there, right? So we have an implementation plan with quite a few different recommendations for each component of the plan. And then lastly, how are we doing? So how are we going to track that progress and assess how things are going so that, again, this is a 10-year plan. So things are going to change over that time period, and we want to be able to adjust accordingly when things do change. And I do want to mention too, there's also going to be several appendices to the main document for folks who want to kind of dive in deeper and get into more of the nitty gritty. And then we'll wrap up by talking about the next steps here. So project schedule, I know a lot of you have seen this already, but we kind of divided things into 3 phases. And we are currently toward the end of phase 2. So we're just about to finish wrapping up the draft UFMP. And then we've got this open house and comment period that is going to begin in a week. And then we'll move on to incorporating all of the feedback we get during that period. And that'll help fine tune our recommendations, and we'll develop a final urban forest management plan that we present to the City Commission for adoption and approval. And we have had 4 work sessions so far with the Urban Parks and Forestry Board. And that's just to kind of keep them up to speed so they understand exactly where we are in the process, and they can also provide their input and feedback during that as well. And we do have one more of those scheduled after we incorporate feedback from this public comment period so they can kind of see that final plan and what's changed and provide any comments on that. And public engagement meetings. So we are currently in this virtual public meeting, the 3rd row over. And that, again, the purpose of this meeting is to present the draft so that you kind of know what you're looking at when you go to comment on it during the comment period here, which will be August 17th through September 15th. And then we'll have that meeting halfway through that period to answer more questions that you might have after getting to dive into that a little bit. Okay, so there are several purposes and priorities that were identified early in the project that help guide the rest of this process. And we began by taking a hard look at the existing tree infrastructure and comparing that to other cities with similar characteristics to Bozeman. We also assessed the city's staffing and equipment resources, kind of both as they exist today and in terms of what would be needed to carry out the plan. We reviewed numerous existing regulatory and policy documents and spoke with different departments to help make sure that the plan is consistent with those other documents. We assessed community engagement efforts and volunteer capacity within the city to help implement portions of the plan. We know that there's several active folks who are able and willing to help, and to try to understand that, because that's going to help shape the plan to a large extent with, obviously limited city capacity. No matter how high that gets, it's going to be limited in some way. And then we took a hard look at the threats to the urban forest so that we could better include components to monitor, mitigate, and recover from those threats. Okay, so the plan begins with an introduction that places the urban forest management plan within the context of Bozeman's community and geographic location, the changes that the city is going through, and the future challenges that are anticipated for the urban forest. And it identifies the mission and vision statements, which are slightly modified from 2016, and I'll cover those in just a second. And it also provides an overview of the results of that tree inventory and tree canopy that, again, are a snapshot in time, right? Just kind of talks about, what do we have now so that we know that can help shape where we decide to go in the future. So the mission statement helps to explain the overarching purpose of the Forestry Division. And again, this was modified slightly from the 2016 plan, the version that was in there. Nothing changes substantively. It just helps to ensure that the terminology in the statement is consistent with the terminology we use throughout the plan. So the mission statement, the city of Bozeman is committed to providing a healthy, safe, and aesthetically pleasing urban forest for its residents and visitors. By maintaining, managing, and preserving its trees, the city raises its citizens' standard of living and maximizes the benefits offered by its urban forest. And so that every piece of that is carefully thought out. Try to keep it succinct, but again, that's going to help guide the whole rest of everything that's in the plan, is having that mission statement articulated. And then the vision statement. So the vision statement paints a picture of what things will look like if the mission is carried out well. And again, this too had some minor modifications just to the terminology to make it consistent with the rest of the plan. But I'll read it out loud quickly here. Bozeman's urban forest is an essential component of municipal infrastructure, one that creates efficiencies and provides long-term benefits to residents and visitors alike. Through sustainable management by the city and its people, the urban forest creates a high quality of life, a healthier citizenry, and makes Bozeman a leader of cities in the Mountain West. All right, so with that, we're going to kind of get into the heart of things after the introduction, and I'll turn it over to Matt.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, so this is where we start discussing the what do we have section of the UFMP. This section is really the existing conditions foundation of the plan. So before setting goals or recommending actions, the project team looked at how Bozeman's urban forest is currently managed, what the inventory and canopy data show, what staff and the public identified as priorities, and how growth is changing in the context for tree management. A key point here is that Bozeman is not starting from scratch. The Forestry Division already has a defined role in managing city-owned trees and parks, rights-of-ways, and other public spaces, and the hiring of a city forester in 2017 was a direct outcome of the 2016 UFMP. So this update is building on progress from the previous plan rather than replacing it entirely. The bigger question is how the city adapts that existing program to current conditions: continued population growth, development pressure, climate stress, pest risk, and increasing expectations for trees as public infrastructure. Next slide. All right, so as part of the process, we engaged in internal engagement and public engagement with staff surveys and staff interviews. The staff survey helped identify where urban forestry work intersects with day-to-day city operations. One of the clearest themes was that staff recognized the difference between managing individual trees and managing the urban forest as a larger system. And that distinction matters because many tree-related decisions happen outside the Forestry Division. Street design, parks planning, development review, water conservation, code enforcement, and capital projects can all affect whether trees are planted successfully, protected, or maintained over time. Staff also identified a need for clearer responsibilities, especially between street trees, park trees, private trees, and trees associated with development. And that feedback is reflected throughout the UFMP and recommendations for interdepartmental coordination, clearer metrics, and better alignment between forestry, parks, community development, public works, and other departments. Next slide, please. So moving on to the public survey. The public survey showed strong support for trees, but also some important nuance. Residents generally want the city to maintain existing trees and plant more. They also understand that removing a mature tree and planting a new one is not an equal trade in the short term, that mature trees provide canopy, shade, stormwater benefits, habitat, and neighborhood character that take decades to replace. The survey also showed divided opinions on private trees. Some residents want more city support or oversight, while others are concerned about private property impacts. And because of that, the UFMP takes a measured approach. It emphasizes education, incentives, guidance, and support before moving toward more regulatory tools. Another strong theme was species selection. Residents want trees that support shade, wildlife, pollinators, diversity, and long-term resilience, and that aligns closely with the plan's focus on right tree, right place, climate-adapted species, and reducing reliance on overrepresented or vulnerable trees like ash. Next slide. So here we get into the tree inventory review, the data analysis. The inventory gives us a very useful snapshot of Bozeman's public tree population. The city has more than 28,000 inventoried public trees, representing about 46 genera and roughly 110 unique species. And that's a strong data foundation for planning. The most important takeaway is that Bozeman's public tree population is relatively young. with about 59% of trees in the 0 to 6-inch DSH class. Much of the city's future canopy is still developing. So that creates both an opportunity and a responsibility. If these young trees receive proper establishment care and structural pruning, they can become the next generation of mature canopy. Then we look at the condition data, which is generally positive, with most trees in good or fair condition. However, the diversity concern is significant. Ash makes up 22% of public trees, and that level of reliance on one genus creates risk, especially with emerald ash borer continuing to spread in North America and into Montana. Next slide. All right, so tree canopy cover. As part of the project, we did a canopy assessment, and canopy estimates vary depending on the data set, imagery, resolution, and methodology used. Available tools and data sets estimate Bozeman's current canopy cover at approximately 10 to 12%, but based on the consulting team's review of available methodologies and data sets, the UFMP recommends using 9.8% as the technical baseline for measuring canopy progress over time. And that broader 10 to 12% range is useful for understanding why partner tools referenced in the UFMP, such as American Forest Tree Equity data, may report slightly different canopy values than what the team is recommending. So this canopy baseline should also be interpreted within Bozeman's local context. The Gallatin Valley is historically had limited native tree cover outside of riparian corridors. So Bozeman's urban forest is largely an intentionally planted and maintained community asset rather than an extension of a naturally forested landscape. As a result, Bozeman should not be compared directly to wetter or naturally forested cities. Generally, canopy guidance often identifies lower targets for arid and semi-arid communities, with approximate targets of 12 to 15% for desert cities, 18 to 20% for grassland cities, and 30 to 40% for forested regions such as the Northeast, Pacific Northwest, and Southeast. Given Bozeman's high elevation, semi-arid setting, and historical grassland context, the UFMP's recommended increase from 9.8% to 12% represents a realistic and locally appropriate canopy goal. The analysis also found that Bozeman has significant plantable space. About 62% of the land area is considered potential planting space, meaning the primary constraint is not simply whether there is room for more trees. The larger challenges are implementation capacity, water availability, establishment care, maintenance, species selection and sourcing, and ensuring trees are integrated into development and infrastructure projects in ways that allow them to survive. So this is why the plan emphasizes realistic canopy growth. The goal is not just to plant more trees, it is to plant trees that can establish, mature, and provide long-term benefits in Bozeman's local climate and urban conditions. Next slide, please. All right, so Bozeman's audit score. As part of the UFMP plan, we performed what is called an urban forest audit. The audit score provides a broader assessment of Bozeman's urban forestry program beyond the tree inventory. So as part of the update, the consulting team reviewed 28 local documents, plans, and resources using the U.S. Forest Service's Urban Forest Sustainability and Management Audit Discovery Matrix. And this framework evaluates 11 categories of urban forest sustainability and management, including policy, staffing, funding, inventories, risk management, disaster planning, list goes on. And the purpose of the audit is not just to assign a score. It helps identify program strengths, gaps in current practices, and opportunities to improve efficiency, urban forest health, environmental justice, and long-term resource allocation. The review also considered information gathered through staff interviews, benchmarking, data analysis, community engagement, and other UFMP planning tasks. And as you can see, Bozeman scored 74% for urban forest sustainability and management. And that score is above the 62% average from about 27 comparable audits completed by the consulting team. And it reflects Bozeman's established urban forestry program, dedicated staffing, inventory system, funding structure, management authority, and continued investment in the public tree care. The value of the audit is that it also shows where Bozeman can continue to improve. Some categories point toward the need for stronger professional capacity, continued inventory updates, clear standards and best management practices, improved disaster planning, and more consistent implementation tracking. So in other words, the audit confirms that Bozeman has already made really meaningful progress, but the next phase is about formalizing systems so the program can keep pace with growth, climate stress, pest risk, infrastructure demands, and public expectations. Next slide, please. All right, so now we're on to the what do we want section of the UFMP. This section moves from existing conditions to the desired future. The plan's vision is centered on coordination, shared responsibility, and adaptability. That framing is important because the urban forest cannot be managed by the Forestry Division alone. It depends on city departments, residents, developers, institutions, businesses, and community partners all playing a role. The canopy goal that we've discussed and is in the implementation or what do we want section is to increase the canopy from 9.8 to 12% by 2046. And that equals about 871 new trees per year, or 17,420 trees over 20 years. We feel this is intentionally a realistic long-term target. It acknowledges that Bozeman has plantable space, but also that planting must be matched with staffing, funding, water-conscious design, species suitability, and long-term maintenance. The UFMP also includes additional canopy growth scenarios that can be considered if regular progress tracking shows that city capacity, funding, and tree survival and community partnerships can actually support a more ambitious target over time. And those will be able to be found in the appendices of the UFMP draft. The important thing is the goal is not to simply hit a number. The real objective is to grow canopy in a way that is sustainable, resilient, and useful to the community. Next slide, please. All right, so here we see the primary goals of the UFMP. The 6 goals are designed to work together rather than stand alone. The first goal focuses on treating the urban forest as essential infrastructure, meaning trees are managed with data, funding, coordination, and accountability. The second goal focuses on maintenance, because Bozeman's young tree population will only become future canopy if those trees are pruned, watered, inspected, and maintained properly. The third goal addresses canopy growth, diversity, climate adaptation, survival, and equitable distribution of benefits. Goals 4, 5, and 6 broaden the plan beyond routine tree work. They address development and infrastructure, pest and disaster preparedness, and community stewardship. This structure reflects what we heard from staff and public. Bozeman needs to plant and maintain trees, but it also needs clearer standards, better coordination, private property support, and a stronger resilience framework. Next slide, please. The how do we get there section. This slide explains how the plan moves from goals to implementation. Each goal has an implementation matrix with supporting actions, and each action includes action targets that identify near-term, mid-term, and long-term steps. This is intended to make the plan usable rather than just aspirational. The matrices also identify relative costs and responsible parties. And that's important because implementation will require coordination across city departments, external partners, and the community. Some actions are squarely within forestry's role, while others depend on community development, public works, parks, GIS, HOAs, developers, and nonprofit partners. The resources and consideration sections provide more detail behind the action, so the plan can serve as both a policy document and a practical reference for implementation. Next slide, please. And here we see goal 2 and an example of one of the actions. This example shows how the implementation matrices are structured. So the action shown here is about formalizing risk-based maintenance categories. And that may sound technical, but is a very practical recommendation. Clear maintenance and risk categories help the city prioritize work, document decisions, plan annual workloads, and communicate why certain trees or maintenance needs are addressed first. And this is especially important as Bozeman's tree population grows and as more trees move from young establishment into larger maintenance classes. The resources listed under Goal 2, including pruning cycles, young tree structural pruning, standing contracts, and mitigation planting, are all tied to the same idea, that proactive maintenance is usually less expensive and more effective than reactive work after decline, failure, or emergency conditions occur. Next slide, please. Here we see an example from Goal 3. This action focuses on replacing removals with diverse climate-adapted species. And that is especially important for ash management, but it also applies to all removals. Every removal is a chance to reduce future vulnerability if replacement trees are selected carefully. The goal is not just one-for-one replacement. The replacement tree should match the site, available soil volume, water conditions, overhead and underground conflicts, and long-term canopy goals. The plan also emphasizes tracking survival, location, species, and contribution to diversity goals. And this is how Bozeman can use routine replacement planting to gradually shift the urban forest toward a more resilient species mix without relying on a single large planting campaign. Next slide, please. All right, goal 4. So this example highlights the recommendation to consolidate. This example highlights the recommendations to consolidate tree-related guidance into a city tree manual. And that's a useful implementation tool because tree-related standards are often spread across code, policies, specifications, development review procedures, and internal practices. So a tree manual can make expectations clear for staff, developers, contractors, residents, and partner organizations. You can also incorporate industry standards such as ANSI A300 and ISA best management practices for planting, pruning, and preservation. And this is particularly important as Bozeman grows. Development, infrastructure projects, and water-conscious site design will shape the future urban forest. So having clear standards helps ensure that trees are not treated as an afterthought, but as part of site planning, streetscape design, stormwater function, and long-term public infrastructure. Next slide, please. All right, the how are we doing section. So the final section of the plan focuses on tracking progress. A UFMP should not sit on a shelf for 10 to 15 years without evaluation. Bozeman will need to monitor whether the actions are being implemented, whether canopy is changing, whether the inventory remains current, and whether management activities are keeping pace with need. Key metrics include the benchmark table in the plan, the public tree inventory, periodic canopy assessments, annual planting and removal numbers, pruning activity, pest preparedness, and progress on implementation actions. The recommendations for a formal update in 10 to 15 years gives the city a long-term revision cycle, but the plan should still be reviewed and adjusted along the way. Urban forestry conditions change over time, especially with growth, pests, drought, staffing, and public priorities. So the goal is adaptive management. Use the data, report progress, and revise course as needed. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Matt. That was a lot to cover. And now just before we move into the Q&A section here, just a couple more things. So again, the public comment period will start next Monday, the 17th, and last through mid-September. And hopefully it's clear. I don't know if anybody submitted any questions so far tonight, but there should be a Q&A tab or a way to do that. And once we get to that stage here in a couple minutes, you can also just take yourself off mute and ask your question, whatever you feel most comfortable with. You can also submit comments on the project webpage. And again, we'll have a follow-up public engagement meeting on August 31st, and that will be in person. And there you'll have, again, an opportunity to ask questions that have come up, after you've had a chance to review the UFMP. And then, the step after that is for us to incorporate your comments and finalize the document and get it approved. So that's where we're going. And now maybe turn it over to Alex to kind of MC the Q&A session, and you can send them to me or Matt or Chris as appropriate.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks everyone for covering all that. Certainly a lot of information, and it's a complex plan. It's a complex system to maintain all of our urban trees. I think to get into the Q&A things here, I'm sort of an improv host here. Our communications team was not available to host, and I might have been on the hook for starting up a Q&A function, but I'm not seeing that on my end. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, and I see one guest has her hand up. I'm kind of going to go in order, and I'll read off a couple that are in the chat first, and then I see that Marcia has her hand up, and we'll cover that next. So the first question is from Allison Sweeney about the vision statement, and that we say we're a leader among cities in the West. How are we sort of defining that? How do we qualify that? And some of the questions are, if it's not a huge number for expanding the canopy, do we have remarkable protection codes in place Do we have per capita funding that's above average, or tree planting that's above average? So really, how are we clarifying that? And I think maybe there's an answer in the comparison cities and a couple other items. I'll let the consultant team go first, and then I have some thoughts myself on that as well.
Well, maybe I'll say something, and we'll Matt or Chris kind of get queued up here. But I think one obvious example that comes top of mind is the Heritage Tree Program. So based on feedback we've gotten recently, it's clearly very important to folks in Bozeman that gets established, that program. And looking deeply into that, we discovered that nobody around here has one. So Bozeman would be definitely a leader once that gets established. Chris, it looked like you were about to say something.
I'd let Matt weigh in more here, but I did want to recognize that having an EAB Emerald Ash Borer management plan preliminary, being proactive about that is really a huge step already in leading the region, and then implementing that and being mindful and monitoring your canopy because. Yeah, preserving what you have is critical because it can be a harsh growing environment. So I was really pleased to see that this project is prioritizing that. And then also, looking at being realistic and establishing canopy goals and not just business as usual while understanding the capacity limits, but that this UFMP can help drive that. And I think, how the city's going to implement this plan is going to be a model because other cities do experience those challenges. So that's going to that vision statement question, and happy to elaborate on any of the other questions that were raised, but I'll see if Matt or others want to chime in.
No, I think, Chris, you really answered that well. And the EAB plan and diversifying the city's canopy cover is going to be a really big model. Just because the other cities that we benchmarked in Montana don't have the ash composition, they all have, species diversity issues, whether it's Norway maple in Missoula or black locust, little leaf linden in Silver Butte. So really being a leader in diversity of your urban forest will be something that sets you guys apart, and that is part of the EAB management plan.
Okay. Yeah. Great comments. I think I just wanted to point out, taking a lot of pride in what we have existing as an in-house staff operation. Our tree inventory system, the way we manage and record the work that we do, and the decision making that we glean from that system. The whole team participates in that and maintains that data, and that's just such a powerful tool that we have in place. I don't think any other Montana community has a system that's as dynamic and accurate as ours, and that trickles down into all the work that we do, how we plant trees with diversity, how we respond to storm damage, how we tackle removals and then replacements. I just think we have a really robust system in place right now. We know that there's a lot of room for improvement, and that's why we're doing this plan. So I think, the long drawn out answer to that is we are currently leading as an urban forestry program, and we desire to continue that sort of high level of quality. So that's my answer for that. The next question in the chat here, kind of a multi-question. Who's defending view sheds when we talk about planting trees or maintaining trees? How are we also maintaining views? How are we accounting for native grasses and pollinators? I'm assuming this is about private solar, talking about, trees not blocking solar panels getting added to structures and rooftops. And then how are we balancing trees with water demand? So kind of multi-pronged. I have a couple quick answers for this, and then I'll go to the consultant group if they want to add. I think in terms of defending view sheds, we're not necessarily blocking out vistas. I think especially as far as boulevard trees go, That's a city requirement with all other types of infrastructure like street parking, street lights, hydrants, signage. So we're really not adding to blocking of a view there. And we're very conscientious in park design, and there's public input process to that. In terms of native grasses and pollinators, we certainly view that as a complement to urban trees. I would say we can really up the ante on that in park spaces where we can compound those complementary plants together. It's a little more limited in a boulevard space. So I'd want a nice bit of wood chip mulch instead of grass and plants right next to a tree in a small space like a boulevard. I think we can trim trees over time as they mature so that you are getting shade and solar access. So that's something we do pretty actively with our mature tree pruning right now. And in terms of water demand, I would say that trees require water pretty regularly, but nowhere near what a turf grass lawn would require. And I think that's part of the compromise in that trees offer a lot of benefits, purifying the air, cooling houses, beautification, wildlife habitat. The cost of that is a little bit of maintenance and a little bit of water. The return on investment is substantial. Those are my answers to those questions. If anyone wants to throw in any thoughts.
Yeah, and I agree with you there, and I think the UFMP supports that. So while we don't necessarily address view sheds or solar panels within the UFMP, we address right tree, right place practices and use those as guidance for, how the city should plant trees, what trees they should plant where, which, will be considered in future planning decisions when it comes to view sheds. Pruning recommendations will help with, solar panels and trees blocking views or other issues. And then we do have a high level section discussing water sustainability, prioritizing trees and native grasses or native flower mixes for pollinators, and basically doing that in non-programmable spaces. Because as Alex said, turf grass, a field of turf grass will take more water than these new planted trees. So you want to really prioritize areas. You can't turn every area of turf into a forested area as much as we want to. We need sports fields, we need recreation areas, there's programmable spaces that the city uses. But there are also those areas on the edges that aren't, that could be converted from turf grass, have mulch, have these native pollinator blends, which the city would use local sources to determine the best pollinator blends and wildflower mixes. So we do have that addressed in high level, and I think it can support whichever direction the city goes with that.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, those are some of the questions in the chat. And Marcia, go ahead. I think I may need to unmute you, or
Yeah,
there you go. You're all
I
set.
did it. All right. Yeah, I couldn't figure out the chat thing right away, so I just raised my hand. Anyway, thanks for that presentation. I'm looking forward to the big drop next Monday. And Matt, you had a lot of information coming at us. I am not an auditory learner, so I'm really hoping my first question is a technical one. I'm hoping this is recorded, which it looks like it is being recorded, and it will be posted for us to be able to review for the public to be able to look at on the engagement site, because I will definitely need to go back over and listen again and break it down, all those things that you were talking about. So I see some head nodding from Alex.
Yeah, this
Okay,
session's being recorded. Yep.
great. And I'll go on that engagement site, hopefully. Okay, cool. The second question had to do with private trees and private property. It feels like private trees did not get separated out into, say, trees on private property undergoing development review, which is very different from trees in backyards. And it feels like from what you said in the beginning, that is still lumped together kind of in one, and that you were going with a direction more on education and voluntary care of that. And so I was curious about that, but my real question has more to do with goal number 4 and trying to make this succinct, but bear with me. When the public and the planning staff and the city commission are all expecting this plan to direct policy and then eventually codes, I know you had some previous recommendations along those lines. It sounds like, from what you said about the private trees, that is no longer going to be in this, and yet we're all those 3 groups are really highly depending on this plan to direct the policy, because that's what we've been told all last year during the UDC. So with that, I think under goal number 4, well, first of all, I hope to see that in the plan when it comes out next week, and maybe that was just too much to cover tonight. But the other thing is, in goal number 4, it talks about protected trees when you first brought up the slide that had the different goals, and then tree protection during construction. And I think this is another one of those really important points. And I know Alex will know what I'm talking about, is there's that tree protection zone when there's construction going on. And that's very different from keeping existing trees standing, like having the planners working with the developer on designing around the existing mature trees. And that's where we've been waiting for this plan to help direct that policy. And I think it was in the RFP as well that we're going to work on some policy there. So maybe before you publish the draft, it seems like we need a distinction between what does tree protection mean? Is it just the zone around the roots? Or is it keeping existing trees standing? I found that a little confusing. And then until the end with the questions about being a leader, I didn't hear anything mentioned about the Heritage Tree Program. And I know that was left over from probably one of the few things left over from the 2016 plan that was to be developed. That was a recommendation to develop one before the Tree Advisory Board was broken down and changed. There was a draft proposal for that, an initial draft proposal. And so I'm wondering if there will be strong guidance with the Heritage Tree Program, even if it's a voluntary one, but just some sort of guidance in that department. Sorry to take up so much time. Thank you.
Okay, lot there, a lot of questions within a question. And I think a short answer for me is we have another round of the draft, and we're expecting that next week, with more detail on what a tree protection zone is, what are examples to work off of from other communities for a heritage tree program. I think maybe Matt might have a bit more detail, kind of just worked on some revisions this past week. You want to throw something in there, Matt?
Yeah, so Chris actually worked on this, but we put together basically template language for a heritage tree program for Bozeman, along with example studies of multiple cities throughout the U.S., because as we mentioned, Montana does not have any of heritage tree program of the comparable cities. So we have examples from other cities with case studies and success stories that may work for Bozeman. And we've included all of that as an appendices in the UFMP, so that the city can take our guidance and implement what they believe will work within the Bozeman context, using that framework and the language we've provided. We are working on code language recommendations and review of ordinances for tree protection and tree development, through development. And we have some recommendations started. It does start with education and starts with incentives, but we do have stronger regulatory practices that you can build up to. But that will require increasing capacity, increasing resources for the program to do that. So that is laid out high level within the plan. It was a lot to try and address in the presentation tonight, but you will be seeing some of that within the UFMP.
Okay.
I might just highlight quickly that what Matt said about the Heritage Tree Program. I think that's just an example of how we we really do appreciate your feedback and your comments. And we took that to heart and went back and added a whole new appendix and a lot more detail surrounding that. And I think the plan's going to be better because of it. So thank you again for that feedback.
And I think it's worth adding too for folks that are maybe just tuning in for tonight. A big process behind this is to get the recommendations, the guidance, and a lot of standards from this consulting team and get that in the document. And then some of our homework is to then we have to go and work together with community development and planning, and that's going to be an ongoing project after the finished product here of this plan, is that we will have to work with some other city departments and sort out some of those details that we need for those next steps in terms of like changing development code language, for example. Like that'll take some ongoing discussion with some other city staff, but it is an implementable, actionable goal of the plan. So that's part of the process to give us work to do for the next 10 years. Okay, so we have another question in the chat on do we have a filter of some sort to identify gaps in our boulevard plantings? Finding money and partners to remedy that, and have we identified gaps in boulevard tree planting? I think there's some answers here from the team in regards to the plan, but I even think outside of this plan, that's something we are actively pursuing just internally with city staff, and our GIS department jumps out to that, and our nonprofit partnership that's existing today with Gallatin Watershed Council. That is a direct goal of that partnership, is to find priority areas for tree planting throughout the city, not just for boulevards, but for park spaces as well. And that's based on an equity item, water quality, and urban heat island effect. So that's an active goal that we can monitor, changing over time with GIS satellite imagery tools that we already have in place. And perhaps this management plan allows us to further clarify that goal and further refine the areas we're targeting. I'm sure folks could help here from the team with how that sort of ties into our canopy percentage goals and some of the planting goals and removal goals that we have in this plan. We have another comment here. I'm not quite sure what the comment is about north of Kagi Corner. Maybe with some tree work recently, but Cooper Park as a good example of having both turf grass and trees. Cooper is a great site where we've had an established mature canopy, and we're starting to lose some of that mature canopy due to some just aging out of trees, and then also a disease issue. So we've unfortunately had to remove some larger trees in Cooper Park, but we've had that active replacement going on for a few years now. So that is a great example of a historic tree canopied park that the ongoing maintenance is, you don't just replace the same tree. We replace with a wide diversity. Now these new species aren't prone to the same disease or insect or weather vulnerabilities. So Cooper is kind of ongoing, and a lot of new trees getting planted to sort of offset the removals that we're forced to do. We have a question on the Heritage Tree Program template, and that we can get across the finish line without hiring additional consultants. I think that's certainly reasonable. I think this was a bit of the missing piece we needed, having this consulting team here put together some standards and bring that experience from other communities. We've kind of done that work on our own with some citizen advisory boards. And what I see there is really putting those two efforts together. And again, that's a fairly immediate goal for us to work on once this plan's adopted, is to really get that heritage tree program developed and reach out to the city departments we need to kind of get it finalized. But I don't really foresee needing to hire any other outside specialists for that. I think that's kind of it on comments there. I'm not seeing other questions right now. And I think we're on. Oh, Marcia has another question. Yes, your hand is still up. Yes. Sorry, missed it.
That's all right. I took it down and then I realized, thank you for the answers to my previous questions. And I just wanted to clarify one expectation. That is not that the consulting team would be writing the codes, or even suggesting code language. I think so. Sorry, everybody that's listening in, but I think one of the things that is expected from this plan that was missing from the goals when I read them is that strong desire to have new development work around a significant portion, whatever that portion amounts to in the future to be decided, yet to be decided, but that design works around existing mature trees, especially say native groves of trees. And if that's not in the goal, in one of the goals, from my experience with the UDC revisions, I don't think that will be received as a goal. I mean, I think it just needs to be clearly stated in one of those goals. And with tree protection, that's why I was asking about that. It's not really clear. And so hopefully that can be tidied up and cleared up, because that has come through. I know that you guys have been talking about it from the public input and other groups, that's a strong desire by the community, and the planning staff just need to hear that yes, the city commission votes yes on that. And so then the code writing actually comes later, like you were saying, Alex. And I know you have some, volunteers waiting to help with that when that time comes.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's, this second round of draft is to get further emphasis, further defining those goals. So that's exactly what we're working on with this second draft. Okay. Another question in here about meeting with Tree Coalition, Gallatin Watershed Council, outside partners. I think we'd really have to discuss what we have left in terms of schedule and budget capacity to add on any additional meetings. And I think that's kind of a helpful snapshot for kind of wrapping this meeting up. The images that Josh had at the beginning of the presentation is kind of what the schedule is in the budget for this process. And we've got another big in-person meeting coming at the end of the month. We're starting the public comment period. And then when that closes in mid-September, early September, then we're taking sort of final synthesis of everything and then getting that to city commission. So there's a few opportunities left, right, for everyone to be involved. It's another in-person meeting, public comment. We have one more work session with the Urban Parks and Forestry Board coming up. So those are all opportunities for some public comment and public input in this process. And those are some of the tools that we have to work with. So yeah, I think we're about wrapped up here. We're at the time limit here, so appreciate everyone attending. And yes, this was recorded, so we'll have those items up on Engage. We'll have a few more updates on Engage Bozeman for the rest of the schedule, and we'll just keep moving through this effort. So thanks everyone for attending. Thanks the team for the presentation.
Thanks
Have
everyone.
a good night, everything's open for further public comment at any moment. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
care.